Come on up here, man. Great to have you. Give him a round of applause, guys.
So I did not plan very well. Apparently, Johnny covered a lot of my topic just now, so I'm going to be improvising a little bit and emphasizing different parts, so bear with me. I'm lead developer at MWEB, so I'm going to talk a little bit about financial privacy, the history of how it's all changed, and about how we can get back to a time where we actually have some privacy when we transact, instead of everything going through just a few payment processors with, the government surveilling. Is this thing working? Yeah, this isn't going to work, I don't think. So next slide, please. Okay, so I'll start with brief history here of financial transactions. Next slide. In the golden days of transacting, people literally used gold. They used silver. They used other precious metals. They used cash. They used seashells. They used various collectibles. But it was some kind of physical good. And when you transacted with a physical good, there's no eavesdroppers. There's no surveillance. There's no kind of centralized ledger recording all the transactions. You just trade the value. And this is about as close as perfect financial privacy as you get. So this is what we want to get back to with crypto, with MWEB and with our other developments. Next slide. All right. So in the 50s, this thing called the Diners Club card was created. And it started with just a few restaurants accepting it, and it grew throughout the US and then to Mexico, the UK, and before long, credit cards were starting to become a thing. You can see there's 4 other companies followed suit. You had American Express in 58, and MasterCard, and then Visa, Discover. And just slowly over that time, the usage started to increase. Next slide, please. So the early credit cards we didn't have the same technology. They were a little more difficult to use, a little less convenient. So that's partially maybe why they weren't used as often. To transact, the clerk would have to check a list that's updated either daily or relatively frequently, a list of all known stolen or lost credit cards. Make sure that the number is not on there. If it's over $30, the transaction, they would actually have to call the credit card company and to get phone authorization. And then after that, they would use this thing called an embosser, and that's a picture of it there. And you'll see in the next slide in action. And they'd actually scan the card physically and imprint it into a piece of paper, and then the customer would sign that imprint. This was used up until the early 90s for the most part. Next slide, please. So it wasn't too difficult, though, because 9-year-old Kevin McAllister was still able to run up a $2,200 plus credit card bill for his father at the Plaza Hotel in New York City. You can see it in action there. You just have to manually run your hand across it and imprint the credit card. It wasn't super convenient, but people did start to use it for travel. Some wealthier people had credit cards. Some businesses used credit cards, but it didn't really reach the middle class until a little bit later. Next slide. So later 80s, early 90s, they started to have department store credit cards. These would be like Sears would have their own card that you can use only at Sears. And they weren't as bad for privacy as our modern credit cards, because Sears would only have access to your transactions at Sears. Kohl's would only have access to your transaction at Kohl's. You don't have a list of all of your past transactions that they can learn about, that they can profile you on, or anything like that. But this was kind of like, this was when they started to really gain adoption, was with department store cards. And then came the next slide, the late 90s and beyond, and pretty much credit cards for everything. It's become the de facto payment standard, obviously. Most things are purchased via credit card instead of cash. And we're moving towards what's called a cashless society. Next slide. And this is one where Johnny talked about all the problems with privacy in a cashless society, how having just a handful of payment processors with your entire transaction history, it's obviously got all kinds of problems that associated with it. Next slide. So one of which is data mining. So if they have access to your entire transaction history, they can learn a lot about you. They can profile you. They can try to figure out what you'll spend money on. How they can manipulate you. They can do any kind of processing on that data. You also have next slide. Data breaches. So it seems like all the time now, big financial institutions, they're leaking thousands, hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of customer data due to some big hack or some security flaw in their system. So just having all that data in one place is a problem to begin with. It's even if they're not abusing the data, it's just dangerous. It's a hazard to have it sitting around. So we don't really want that at all. We don't want anyone to have access to that data. Next slide, please. And then obviously, like John talked about, digital surveillance is a huge problem. Started, back with the Bank Secrecy Act in 1970. This is where, to combat money laundering, any transaction or group of transactions totaling over $10,000 would be reported to the IRS. And of course, 10,000 back then was a lot more than 10,000 today. And that kind of changed recently with the American Rescue Plan Act in 2021. It's now $600, and it includes any transactions over the course of the year between two parties. So if I transact a few dozen times with someone for $20 a time, I reach the $600 by the end of the year, suddenly all those transactions get reported to the IRS. You've lost, all freedom there, all privacy. And then there's, the Anti-Money Laundering Act, AML, KYC, all that. And we're moving towards, of course, CBDCs, which is pretty much a loss of all privacy, all financial privacy. Next slide, please. And once they get there, they have the ability to easily censor transactions. We saw with the Freedom Convoy in Canada, it started with GoFundMe and PayPal and other payment processors blocking funds that were donated to the truckers. But then it went beyond that because Trudeau's government actually they started to freeze accounts, bank accounts of people who were suspected of being associated with the convoy. So, you decide that you want to protest something, suddenly the government just freezes all of your assets. You can't pay for food, you can't pay for your house, that's all kinds of problems. We obviously don't want to get there. So we're getting about as bad as it can get right now. So we want to try to reverse that trend and go as far back and as close to actual money, person-to-person transacting as we can. So a huge step in that direction was, next slide, Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin, obviously, this gives a lot of our freedom back, or at least gives us the option. It is built specifically for transacting between two people. Next slide, please. It eliminates the middleman. There's no PayPal who's going to, apply their terms of services to how you use Bitcoin. You can transact with anyone for any reason. It's very difficult to censor. If you Without a middleman, there's no easy way to just ensure a transaction doesn't go through. The government can add addresses to ban lists, which then maybe corporations won't accept coins from those addresses or any addresses associated with those. But as long as you can get a miner to add your transaction to the latest block, you can still transact. It's also pseudonymous. You don't have to KYC. There's no AML. You don't have to register your personal information with every transaction. So that's obviously great. That's moving back towards person-to-person medium of exchange. And then there's no privileged data access. We don't have to worry about data breaches or data leaks because the data's already out there. It's all public. There's no Visa or Discover sitting on a pile of data that they could use maybe for blackmail or to profile people, whatever. Next slide. But there's problems, right? The transparent amounts. So the amounts are all easy to see. The problem with having all the data out there is all the data's out there, right? Everybody can data mine it now. It's not just a few companies. You can all data mine it. Your personal information isn't directly associated with it. But if you leak enough information with every transaction, then maybe over time people can start to identify patterns or identify transactions belonging to an individual. If you have address linking, so that would be like, let's say I share my address and say publicly and say, send me coins here. Well, then every coin ever sent there or sent from that address, anyone can just look at it and see that, that involves David. And then address reuse. If you continue to reuse addresses, anyone analyzing the blockchain then knows that that address belongs to the same person. And then there's also linkable coins. So you can watch coins go on the blockchain. If you can follow, like, when a coin is sent to one address, you can then see from that address which addresses that coin is sent to next. And you can just kind of follow a chain of transactions to learn the whole history of a coin and to learn more about those transacting. Next slide. So see, these are some of the problems we tried to solve with MWEB. MWEB went live block 2,265,984. So on May 20th. Thank you. Yeah, the first MWEB block was mined. And since then, there's been a regular amount of MWEB transactions, maybe one every couple blocks, nothing too crazy, but it's starting to get some usage. It's currently only on Litecoin Core, but we do have anyone who uses it gets confidential amounts. They don't have address linking at all because you can share your address now. It's called a stealth address. You share that address and is wherever you want. As many people as you want can send to that address, but you can't go look at the blockchain and see which transactions involve the address. The only person who knows that would be the person the address belongs to. Only they can see which transactions are involved. And address reuse isn't a problem anymore because the address isn't on the transaction. It's just it's like information for the sender for how to build a transaction to you. They don't actually store the address on that transaction. So I'm now free to reuse my address over and over without concerns, without privacy concerns. But coins are still somewhat linkable. You can still see that this group of coins, and we don't know the values, the amounts of them, but you can see their outputs on a blockchain. If you're familiar with how it works, you can see that this group of them is spent and moves to this other group of them. You may not know the direct links, but you do know the groups involved, and you can maybe start to analyze it and start to see some patterns over time, or maybe probabilistically follow coins and learn data that way. So we leak some data. It's not perfect privacy. Like, if you recall Charlie's scenario, this would be this would be the house with windows, but we do have blinds. We cover out most of the links. We do still leak a little bit of data, and we are working to improve that. Next slide, please. So one of the things we really need to do to improve that is increase usage. With very little usage that we have now from Litecoin Core, you don't have a huge anonymity set. There's not, you're hiding in a crowd of a few, you know. So the more people using MWEB, the bigger the crowd, the more difficult it is to probabilistically follow coins through the chain. So, you know, to increase adoption, we have two main approaches. The first one is the most important, and that's what we're working on right now. It's light client support. So this would be like similar to SPV, how you don't have to download the whole blockchain. You just download the basic headers, and then you share some information that helps identify your transactions, and then you just download the ones relevant to you. This is how mobile phones work. This is how, you know, mobile wallets work. This is how like Electrum works. And it's a lot harder with MWEB to do it in a privacy-preserving way. We could really simply just share our view key, it's called, which allows someone to identify all your transactions without being able to spend them. But what's the point in doing all this work to build better privacy if we're then just going to share our view key with some servers that we don't even know who owns? So it's been a lot of work trying to figure out how to do that efficiently. So we have to download a little more data. It's not going to be quite as fast for mobile wallets, at least unless some new breakthrough is made. But mobile wallets today mobile phones should still have enough processing power to sync very quickly for the foreseeable future. And hopefully, we have a few steps left, and we'll hopefully have a new release here soon that wallet developers can start to build against. We have all the protocol messages they need to actually download the data and to sync the chain the parts of the chain that they care about. And then another way we're trying to increase usage is hardware wallets. Right now, we don't have any support for hardware wallets, and you know, when you have large amounts of Litecoin, sometimes it's a little uncomfortable just trying to store it on your desktop or on your phone. So a lot of people like to use a ledger or something along the lines of that. And without MWEB support for that, then they obviously can't use it. So we want to try to get hardware wallet support too, and that's my next big task. And then beyond that, we also have other ways of improving unlinkability. There's this CoinSwap. CoinSwap is kind of like, it's like you have a big bucket, and you and along with a bunch of other people throw some coins into this bucket. You know how many coins you throw in. Everyone else knows how much they throw in. And then someone just shakes up the bucket, and then you go and pick out the same amount of coins and send it back to yourself. You take those coins back. Everybody takes the same amount they put in. It's very trustless. It's more complicated than this, obviously. But it's a way of like just throwing a bunch of outputs together into one big transaction that then creates brand new outputs, brand new coins that nobody knows the link to. It's like mixing yourself in a crowd. The bigger the crowd, the better. And that's what MWEB already does, but we kind of leak some data at the peer-to-peer layer right now. Like when we broadcast our transactions, anyone eavesdropping can learn kind of the links of the outputs. But with this CoinSwap, nobody will learn. It's like today where you mix everything together in MWEB, but the mixing is all done behind closed doors. Nobody knows. Even people actively monitoring and eavesdropping don't learn anything about the mix. So it's a way of really improving the unlinkability of coins. What else? I don't know what time I even started. Like, am I close? Am I good? Yeah. Does anybody have questions? Anything? Yeah.
I believe, from what I've heard, is there is no transaction history preserved on the MWEB side.
Yeah.
Is that what primarily guarantees privacy and fungibility?
No. The history is more of an efficiency gain. People can still have the history, you just don't necessarily need the history to sync. What preserves it is, I don't have a good graphic, but with traditional Litecoin, when you make a transaction, you say, I'm going to take this coin, and I'm going to send it to this address, and I'm going to send the change back to this address, okay? And you see one input, two outputs. And then someone else may have a transaction where they send two inputs to two outputs. And you'll see those two separate transactions, okay, on the blockchain. With MWEB, when the miner, when it takes all those transactions, it just takes all of the inputs, groups them together, all of the outputs, groups them together, and you lose all the links in between. Okay, so that's where the privacy comes in with MWEB. That and all the amounts are hidden. You know, that's pretty big. No addresses, all amounts hidden. Those are big.
That's what I meant by asking. No transaction history is preserved.
That's not the history though. So that's yeah. I see what you're asking. There's another component that actually then allows you to delete old data. Like you don't have to download all the old data to sync and to know that you have the most recent chain. Okay. That's like the history part. It's called pruning. Okay. And that part is more of an efficiency improvement with MWEB. But the big privacy gains come from, yeah, I guess you can call it the history loss, but you lose the links between the coins being spent and where they're spent to.
Right.
You just know all of these coins were spent in this block. All of these coins were spent to these places in this block. And like I mentioned, on anyone monitoring the network right now can probably pick up and see, oh, this transaction was added, this one was added, and then they were grouped together. So you don't have the perfect privacy. Anyone monitoring can still, unlink them. But with the coin swap, all of that takes place without anybody seeing it. So it's another step farther.
Sure.
So
Thank you. I have one more question, please. So
yes.
You said you're going to add support for the hardware wallets, right?
Yes.
So hardware wallets have very little memory in them. So
Yeah.
how do you plan to be able to download just enough information?
So there's two parts we have to do for hardware wallets.
Okay.
Number one is to allow them to build raw transactions the way they do today. There's APIs built into the code where they call to assemble transactions manually, so that in a way that they do all the signing and stuff. So that's the most important part of what we need to do for hardware wallets. And then the other part goes to the along with the syncing involved. And for that's very related to the light client stuff we're doing, which is trying to make it so that they can sync sort of like an SPV client without needing to download the whole chain and all that data, quickly, efficiently, without using a bunch of memory. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Good. Any other questions? All right. Okay, well, thanks, guys. I'll be around somewhere if you have any questions.
Let's all thank David. The developers are the people behind the scenes making everything happen.
Thanks.
And we wouldn't have